They would say many things about that wedding night, but no one could say what the groom felt in the moment her hand left his for the last time. They would say in years to come that the candles in Greyhaven Chapel burned lower than they should have on the night of the wedding, that the wax sank like tired hearts, that the shadows clung to stone like ivy, that the bells did not ring so much as shiver. They would say many things. They watched as the bride and groom bound their hands with a narrow ribbon white as breath. The chapel smelled of beeswax and evergreen. Petals lined the aisle. Pale blooms gathered that very morning from the walled garden. The villagers, black coats and gray shawls, filled the pews, their faces bright but wary, as though joy might be stolen if held too tightly. They craned to see her, the bride in a gown sewn with seed pearls and threaded light, a veil that pooled like fog at her feet. Alara did not look away from him. Rowan held himself as he always did, broad-shouldered, self-possessed, the iron composure of a lord who had learned too soon that grief made a poor master. Yet his gaze broke against her like waves upon rock and softened there. He had not believed, once, in words like fate. He had believed in duty, in land, in the walled steadiness of a life you build brick by patient brick. He had not expected a single glance across the winter market to make his heart go quiet, and then thunder, to turn the world until everything lined up in the direction of her. "Say it," she whispered, on the final vow. The chapel heard only the officiant's murmur. The vow they had practiced in the garden days ago was theirs alone. "I find you in every wind," Rowan said, so quietly it trembled. "If I ever lose my way, I will listen, and you will be there." A smile like a secret crossed her lips. "Then listen for me." The rings were placed. The ribbon, old custom, was tied around their joined hands, soft as breath. They turned to the gathered village. Cheers rose, fiddles started. The night opened like a book. Wine was poured in the great hall of Greyhaven. Torches flared. The flagged stones glowed. Rowan's bannerman clapped his back. Old Myra from the village pressed a sprig of wintergreen into Alara's palm for constancy, and a younger woman pressed a charm of knotted thread around her wrist for protection, glancing around as if to check that no one important saw. Everyone knew the mutterings about Alara's bloodline, the stories that clung to her family like cobweb, that once, long ago, when the mill burned and the river ran low, a vow had been bartered and a price accepted. It was always brides that carried those kinds of tales, always daughters. Alara tucked the charm beneath her sleeve to keep from making anyone more afraid than they already were. She had grown up in those whispers. She did not feed them with attention. She fed them with living otherwise, gentle, stubborn, kind. Music spun. She and Rowan danced. She laughed. He loved that about her, that when joy came, she met it openly. He placed a hand at the small of her back, felt the steady beat of her heart against his palm, and forgot for a few breaths that the world ever contained winter. "Breathe," he said, when he noticed the fine tremor in her fingers. "I am." She lifted her eyes. "Keep me near. Always." The doors to the terrace had been flung wide for air. Lanterns hung from iron hooks, their glass faces bright. Beyond them the yew maze stood dark as a listening beast. The moon cut a thin coin of silver in the sky. On the terrace, laughter scattered and gathered. Someone began a game with ribbons. Alara stepped out to cool her cheeks and to still the small prickle in her bones that had come and gone since morning. A hush, a pressure, as though a storm lingered beyond the hills, and the earth had not yet decided whether to call it in. She didn't go far. She waited under the last lantern where ivy climbed the balustrade, and quiet sewed up the edges of the noise. Just a breath, she told herself, and she thought of how Rowan's vows had sounded in that hush, how his voice had filled the space right behind her ribs, how it had felt like standing at the mouth of a cave and hearing her name echo back from somewhere deep. Listen for me, she said, to the night, teasing their private promise. The lantern's flame lowered, lifted. Footsteps approached, the thick, polite stride of a house guard. She turned with a smile ready. "Milady," the guard said, bowing. "Your father asks for a word. He waits by the yew gate." "Now?" She glanced toward the hall. They had nearly reached the part of the feast where the ribbon would be cut, where she and Rowan would break bread and salt before the village, a blessing of plenty. Her father would not make her late, not tonight. "So he said," replied the guard, eyes unreadable under the lantern's shadow. Alara hesitated, then nodded. She lifted her veil, tucked its edge into her hair comb to keep from tangling, and followed. The guard's shoulders were familiar. Thomas, she had known him since childhood. He had once let her hold his halberd and showed her how to balance it. That steadied her. She folded her hands at her waist. A moth touched her knuckles and wandered away. The yew gate waited like a black mouth. Lanterns grew fewer. The guard stopped before the arch. "Just inside," he said. "Very well," she said, and lifted the veil enough to keep from stepping on it. The comb slid again. A few pearls ticked softly, like sand in a glass. They went to the yew arch. The lanterns thinned. The night set down on her shoulders. The yew pressed close in the old way of yew, quietly, with the unhurried certainty of a long memory. Inside the arch, the air felt less like air and more like water that had decided not to drown her yet. "Thomas?" she said, because his stride had gone stranger, as if he stepped on different stones than she did. She caught his sleeve with her fingertips. The cloth felt like cloth. His arm felt like a man's arm, weighted with muscle and habit. He did not turn. He lifted a hand and touched her wrist without looking back, as if to move her gently to the left to avoid a puddle. His fingers were colder than the night. Her breath found its own carefulness. She drew the veil forward to keep it from snagging and thought, "Lantern, light, step back, call Rowan." "No, he will not be here," a different voice said from ahead, and the sound it made in the night felt like a knife wrapped in wool. A figure stood where the maze opened onto the old iron grate. Cloak, hood, not ragged, not rough. Someone who dressed to be forgotten the moment he left a room. The scent of incense clung to him, but not of any church. It was older and hungrier. Water muttered below, as if it had found a new path in the last hour. Thomas's hand left Alara's wrist and settled at his side. It flexed once, twice, like a man working to wake a limb that has fallen asleep. "Alara," the cloaked figure said, and the sound of her name in his mouth moved her back a pace without her choosing it. "Forgive the theater. It ensures no one interferes. Even those sworn to your house can be made to turn a moment, if the word is shaped correctly." "Who are you?" Alara asked, and thought of how Rowan had told her once, smiling, that questions properly asked are better weapons than blades because they make people show you where to strike. "Someone who has owed your family too long," the man said, and drew back his hood. He was neither old nor young. His mouth would have been gentle if it had not been trained to be thin. His eyes had the pale steadiness of someone who had believed one thing, hard, for a long time. "Marlene," he said, "of Thorn House. Your grandmother knew my father. Your father knew me. He wanted a different arrangement for you. He forgot how arrangements are kept." Thorn. Old as Greyhaven, older than the existing walls. Old enough to have been a name the river learned to pronounce. Alara lifted her chin. "If this is about old debts, speak to my husband. Speak to the priest. Speak to—" "Your husband?" The corner of Marlene's mouth lifted the least measured fraction. "We have been promised you since you were a child. Promised makes a soft sound when you sign it with ink, Alara. It makes a truer sound when you speak it beside water with your hand on the stone." His look was almost pitying. "And it makes the truest sound of all when blood is involved." Alara did not let herself step back again. You feel nothing for me, she said, and watched the smallest crack open in his composure. Oh, I feel, Marlin said, and he set his palm to his chest as if to press down a bird. It pulls. It burns my sleep. When you walked through the chapel door today, I all but went to my knees. Do you hear me? I thought, finally, the circle closes. He swallowed. What I feel is not choice. Fate marked you. She knew in that moment that whatever tether tied him to her was a counterfeit of what she and Rowan had forged the day they first said each other's names like questions answered. She also knew men have taken false fires for warmth before, and would again. She should be kind. She would not make herself smaller to be so. The thing you feel is hollow, she said. If you were to put it on your tongue, you would taste ash. What I feel for Rowan tastes like bread. If you have ever been hungry, you know this difference. He flinched as if she had touched a wound. The flinch made him more dangerous. You will come, he said, not loud, and it carried because the maze and the iron grate and the small river under the ground gave the syllables back to him. He made a gesture with 2 fingers, and a word moved like a fish under the surface. Thomas swayed where he stood, and his knees hit stone as if his body had forgotten how to be its own. Alara broke and ran. She had never been good at running in skirts. She had never tried hard enough to be good at it. She found that at the first corner, she was better than she'd ever imagined because wanting makes teachers of us all. The maze blurred. Every corner she turned seemed to fold back on itself. She thought she was escaping, yet the air thickened, pressing her feet into a single path. Her pulse hammered, but underneath the panic, another rhythm tugged. Slow, relentless, not her own. The false bond. It dragged her like a hook through water, guiding her deeper whether she willed it or not. Ahead, a glow seeped upward through cracks in the stone. Not lantern light, something stranger, thinner, as if the earth itself burned with fever. The scent of incense and iron thickened until it coated her tongue. She stumbled down a flight of worn steps, the stones slick with moss. At the bottom, the passage opened into a crypt, a chamber prepared long before she ever set foot in the maze. Candles already burned in a ring, their flames unnaturally thin, smoke rising black. A brazier glowed at the center, chalk symbols etched across the floor, pulsing faintly as though alive. And there he was. Marlene. Hood lowered, cloak falling in ordered folds, his pale eyes reflecting the ritual fire. He did not look winded, not even ruffled. He had been waiting. She couldn't get away from him. Ilara, he said softly, almost reverent. At last. Rowan felt her like a silver thread looped round his ribs and given a tug. Not pain, not yet. A pulling, insistently kind, the way you wake a man who has slept too long, gentle at first, and then with the knowledge that there is weather outside and you will both be sorry if you do not get up. He set his cup down without drinking. He did not excuse himself. He walked. The hall made room. He did not look at any face because faces, once you begin to read them, will tangle you in their stories, and this was a line that needed to run straight. On the terrace, the night laid its palm on his cheek as if to look him in the eye. Lanterns threw him toward the U, and the U accepted him as it accepts those who will not be turned merely by long corridors. His lantern's flame leaned and nearly went out where the maze skirted a shallow place in the earth where cold collects, then straightened as if embarrassed. At the grate, he found Thomas on his knees. Thomas, Rowan said, and the man's name came out both question and forgiveness, because Rowan already knew enough to know what he was seeing. My lord, Thomas croaked, and his eyes looked like a man dragged up from a river who must decide again what surface means. He spoke. I could not hear my own head in the noise of it. I thought it was your father. I thought it was the priest. I thought it was myself. Shame rose up and throttled him. He made me take her, he finished, small as a boy who has broken something his mother loved. Rowan crouched. He set a hand on Thomas's shoulder as he would on a horse that has misstepped and knows it. You will tell me later what you remember. For now, guard this place. If anyone follows me who is not Mara or the steward, let the lanterns go out and find yourself elsewhere. Do you understand?" Thomas nodded as if he would nod until his neck refused to work. "Aye." Rowan lifted the grate. It was heavier than pride. It came up because it had never in its life met a man to whom weight was anything but a fact. He went down into the belly where old prayers had pooled and dried. The maze below was different from the one left to hedges and weddings. It had been built when men thought geometry could persuade darkness to listen. Rowan did not trust geometry, and he did not trust the dark. He trusted the pulse where Ilara's name made itself at home in him. He went left where the draft went right. He went where there was less air and knew he was closer because of it. He held the lantern up, and it showed him only what he already knew. That stone does not care what carries you through it. At a fork, doubt put a hand on his throat. He stopped. He did not force his will to be louder. He listened. He heard, the way a man hears his name across a crowded square when the person saying it is the person the world had always been waiting to put in front of him. Ilara. He turned where the call came from and found, with his lantern, a thread of white caught in a crack in the wall. A pearl rolled under his boot and pinged off stone like a star that had lost its way. He smiled despite the shape of his mouth and went faster. Marlin had not waited for ceremony. He had laid out candles, not many, never many, and chalked a ring with signs that had been old when the abbey had called this place its pantry. He had set a shallow bowl of river water in the ring and dropped a sprig of yew into it and watched the water decide whether to bruise. He had set Ilara in the circle and asked her very politely to sit. When she did not, he used a word, and she sat because words can be ropes if you are careless near them. "Why do this?" she asked, while he fussed at a tiny brazier, the smoke from which tried to leave the crypt and could not find a door. "Because its shape keeps the world from falling in," Marlene said. "Because when men neglected the rites last time, the corn blighted and we put 3 babies in the earth in 1 week. Because when my father tried to make your father understand, he told him meanings could be replaced. He was wrong." He looked at her in a way that would have been gentle if gentleness had been the thing that brought him here. "And because it has never been more true that you are meant for me than when you stood beside him in the chapel and the bond between us made my vision swim. What you feel is hunger in a coat that thinks it's a promise," she said. He closed his eyes. "Do not speak to me as if I do not know the difference. This thing is not sweet. It is not kind. It is the truer for it." She would have thrown her candle at him if the circle had let her. Instead, she set the little flame to one of the chalk marks, and the chalk, being what it was, took the light and sent it up in a breath that smelled of nettles. He hissed and stamped at it as if dignity could put out small rebellions faster than boots. When he glanced up, something in his face had gone thinner. "He will come," Marlin said, as if they were talking of weather. "He will," she said, and that yes filled her in a way that made the fear a room rather than a throat. Rowan stepped into the chamber with the sense that he had walked into a place that knew other versions of itself. Lantern light made the shallow bowl shine. It made Marlin's eyes look lighter than a man's eyes ought to be. It made Ilara's mouth be the only soft thing in the room. "Leave the circle," Rowan told Marlin, and the line of quiet in his voice made the water in the little bowl lift and settle. Marlin smiled as if he had expected always to be disappointed. "Lord Greyhaven, you walk like a man who will not apologize. I respect that. It will not help you." "It already has," Rowan said, because he had crossed rooms before where the only thing that carried him end to end was the knowledge that apologies, once you reach a certain point, are for later when bread and blankets are set out. He stepped forward until the chalk almost met his boot. "Ilara," he said, not loud. Her eyes filled with the kind of light that does not come from flame. "I am here." "Stand," Marlin said, and the circle tried to fix her to the floor with a polite, effective gravity. She stood. It hurt. She bared her teeth in something like a smile because it reminded her of the first time she had learned to sew and pricked her finger and decided the thread would do what she told it. "You claim a debt," Rowan said to Marlene. "She is not a ledger entry." "You think too small," Marlene said. "It is not hers alone. It is this patch of earth, these roofs, those children who will cough less in spring if the river rises now. And because it is large, you think you may make it a woman's body," Rowan said. "You have not carried anything heavy in your life if you think that is what carrying means." Marlene's gaze sharpened, cut. "You hear a word inside your head when she speaks, as do I. Do not pretend otherwise." He touched his chest. "This is not caprice. It is mark. It is fate." Rowan's mouth felt suddenly full of the kind of truth that makes a man shake if he says it wrong. He set the lantern down, and the crypt made that sensible act look like an oath. "I do hear her," he said, "and you do too. You have dressed a counterfeit thing in a fine coat and marched it around the square. It fools people who want a parade. It does not fool me. It does not fool her. And you know, under every word you have trained yourself to use, that it does not fool you." Marlene's hand moved. It was a small movement, but the room lurched. The little bowl darkened as if someone had breathed soot into it. A ribbon of water slid along the chalk and made it gleam like eelback. He reached for Alara with his voice, the way a man reaches for a ledge when the thing under him gives. "Come," he said. She felt it. She let it blow past her like wind. "No," she said, "because there are syllables that re-stitch the cloth where someone has cut it." She set her palm flat to the air at the circle's edge and imagined Rowan's hand there on the other side, and that was enough to make the edge go soft. Marlene's composure cracked open. Under it lay anger so long held it had made a nest in him. "Then we do it the old way," he said, and the word he spoke after that had corners. The candle flames bent as if they had been shoved. The water in the bowl shook as if with laughter. The chalk marks flared. He stepped into the circle and reached for her wrist. Rowan crossed the line like a man stepping over a lie. He met Marlene's hand with his own and closed on it. The impact made the candle spit. The shock of skin to skin made a noise in Rowan's head that sounded exactly like Alara saying his name over her shoulder when she wanted him to see something she'd found. Marlene moved with the confidence of someone who had practiced at equal men. His palm hit Rowan's shoulder hard, the kind of blow that, in a tavern, decides who sits where. Rowan took it and used the give to slide to the side and catch Marlene's forearm with both hands, turning the reach into an overextension. The chalk cracked. The smell of the brazier filled their throats like grief. Marlene slashed with a knife he had not been holding a breath ago. The blade bit Rowan's sleeve and the skin beneath. The pain was clean, immediate, honest. It sharpened him. Alara kicked the brazier. Coals spilled and popped. A curl of smoke drew a shape that looked, for a heartbeat, like a hand reaching up from water. She ground her heel on the coals, and the shape loosened, then ran along the floor like a shadow, deciding there were better rooms to haunt. The circle's edge went dull gray. "Stop!" Marlene gasped, and Rowan did not. They moved like men who had always moved and never like this. The crypt narrowed them to essentials: balance, breath, the half-second it takes to choose mercy or its cousin. Marlene fought as if the floor knew his shoes. He fought like someone whose muscles had memorized a catechism you cannot break merely by telling them it is wrong. Rowan fought like a man who keeps his promises in his bones. Marlene's blade came up again. Rowan caught his wrist. They went down together, chalk and water and heat and the old smell of limestone in their mouths. Marlene's head cracked against the low step, and he went dazed, a child looking at summer through a glass of milk. Rowan disarmed him with a twist that would have snapped a lesser man's hand and aimed the point back at him without thinking about where it had come from. "No more," Rowan said, and his voice did not ask. Marlene blinked, breath ragged. "If I stop," he said, "the river will come upstairs and make your house a school. If I stop, the fields will take and take. If I stop, I will have been wrong." "You were wrong when you used a woman to do a river's work," Alara said. She had stepped out of the ring while the chalk forgot itself. She went to Rowan, and the look she gave him would have cauterized a wound if it had been heat. She set her hand to his cut, and the world did a small, private kindness for them both. His blood slowed. "And if the river wants a word with anyone, it can have it with us both. By daylight, with bread on the table." Marlin swallowed. He looked smaller for a heartbeat, a boy who had inherited a rule so heavy it had bent his back and was told, for the first time, that he might set it down without the sky falling. Then the rule remembered it had kept roofs on heads, and his jaw firmed again. "If I go upstairs with you," he said low, "and the floods come, they will put me in the river instead of their corn." "You may stand on my terrace," Rowan said, "and if anyone pushes you, I will throw him after you." Marlin stared. Men do sometimes when offered a rope that looks like their enemy's hand. He looked away first, at the water in the little bowl, which had gone ordinary again, and at the blackened coals. He let the knife go. It rang on the stone like a bell too small to summon anyone, and yet determined to be a bell anyway. He closed his eyes. "I cannot be the first to let it go." "Then you may be the first to carry it back with us," Alara said gently. "It weighs less when more hands take it." They left the crypt together, Rowan's hand steady at Alara's back, Marlene walking as if the tunnel might decide it was a throat and swallow him. On the stairs, Tomas sat with his head in his hands and looked up with a start, then with something like prayers clattering in his eyes. "My fault," he said to Alara, shame peeling his voice thin. "Your name is not in this," she said firmly, and he nodded and found that he could breathe. On the terrace, the night seemed to have waited to hear what story it must believe. The lanterns held steady. Someone had sent for old Myra. She stood with the steward and two of Rowan's men, hands in her shawl as if she had put them there so she would not reach for a stick and begin swatting everyone's legs to make them move. Her eyes moved over Rowan, over Alara, over Marlene. They stopped on the cut on Rowan's sleeve, and she sniffed in a way that meant later. "Boy, is it to be done?" she asked, and the words had the weight of autumn in them. "No bargains with doors shut," Rowan said. "Down by the bend. Now." "Now," Myra agreed, and the steward took off at a run as if he could lay a path under their feet with speed. They went like a little procession, lanterns like stars lowered to hedge height. The meadow gave back a damp sweetness that made everyone's throats feel young. The willow at the bend leaned the way old women lean when they want to hear every word to have enough to talk about tomorrow. The water ran like something alive and busy, which is what it was. Rowan stepped to the bank and pulled Alara with him. Her fingers found his, their ribbon still faintly marking his skin where the priest had tied it, as if the vow had wanted to leave evidence of itself. Marlene hovered at a distance where bravery can decide which direction to take. "River," Rowan said, and the men behind him shifted as if a priest had just said the first word of a rite they had not asked for and would be sorry to interrupt. "We will not put our brides in the dark to tutor you in kindness. We will work. We will plan. We will suffer when you take what we cannot bear to lose and get up the next day and mend what can be mended. We will not let fear keep our harvests in order. We will keep them with hands." He drew breath. "I promised her I would listen. If I lose my way, I will listen, and she will be there. If you must take something, take me when I do not live up to that. Do not take her when I do." Marlene made a noise he could not help, a quiet breaking. Myra lifted her chin like a mast. "You hear the boy?" she told the water. "I add my old bones to the vow." The river performed no miracles one could sell to a crowd. The water did not rise and carry them on its palms. The willow did not move like a woman putting down her knitting to clap, but something unfurled, hesitant, like someone loosening fingers from a handle they had gripped so long they had forgotten their own hand could open. The current ran a shade lighter. The tension in the air that had pricked everyone's shoulders like thrown sand settled. A moth bumped Rowan's knuckles, reconsidered, and went somewhere less anxious. Alara breathed for what felt like the first time since the terrace. The bond between them chimed, no louder than before, but clear in a way that made the counterfeit thing Marlene had clung to look like a child's chalk circle beside a compass rose carved in oak. "It isn't finished," Marlene said roughly, not defiant, but with the stubborn honesty of a man who has lived long under a rule. "You will need men at the West Weir when the leaves fall. You will need to show the boys the flood path and where to run. You will need to—" "We will," Rowan said. "And if the water comes to your hearth," Marlene continued, louder in misery, "no one will remember this mercy you claim. They will remember the old certainty. They will tie ribbons to a girl's wrist and say she must sit in the dark one night so the rest of us may sleep." Rowan looked at him, and because truth demands it, nodded once. "Some will," he said. "You will come to my hall when they do. You will stand beside me and say that you were wrong and that fear cannot do what work can, and I will feed you bread while they decide whether to listen." Marlene stared at him, at the river, at Alara's hand in Rowan's. Shame and relief moved over his face like weather wrestling itself. "If I am pushed in," he said, something almost wry under the worry, "you will indeed throw the pusher in after me." "I'll throw 3, Rowan said, and Alara's laugh slipped out like a lantern, finally choosing where to hang. They walked back to the hall as if the ground had agreed to meet their feet halfway. The villagers who had dared follow this far held back under the trees and peered, and made signs not in any book. When Rowan and Alara stepped into the lamplight, the hall went quiet, in a way voices do when they realize they are about to be woven into a story bigger than their own tongues. Rowan raised his hand, then put it down because he had never liked speaking as if he were selling the weather. "There was an old practice that said the river could be kept fat by putting fear in a bride," he said plainly. "We will not be keeping it. If the river swells, we will brace the banks. If the millstones jam, we will lift them with rope and cursing. If we lose and lose again, we will bake with what we have and bring bowls to those who have less." He looked past the faces to the place where stories choose their shapes. "We will keep our vows without bargaining." Someone cried because someone will always cry when the air changes. Someone laughed for the same reason. The music tried to find its bow and consulted its drum and decided to wait. Old Maera lifted her cup high as if her shoulder did not know the years. "To work," she said, and the words took root. They broke bread. The salt tasted like relief. Rowan and Alara ate the first bites with the careful attention of people who know food carries more than hunger away. Rowan's sleeve stuck at the cut, and Alara tutted and bound it with a strip of her veil because tradition is an animal and must be taught new tricks with treats and patience. Later, when the guests had gone and only the house made its own noises, the tick of old wood, the sound of a hearth settling like a cat, Rowan and Alara went out to the terrace together. The ewe accepted their watching. Far below, water spoke low to stone. The iron grate gleamed like a caution that had decided it could be a lesson. "Do you think he will come when the time comes to haul at the weir?" Alara asked, not unkindly, thinking of Marlene. "He came tonight," Rowan said. "And Thomas?" Rowan's mouth softened. "We will teach him new words to put in front of old ones. So when anyone tries to put spell syllables under his feet, they will find only the floor." She laughed softly. "And if the flood comes?" "We'll row," he said, and she leaned her head to his shoulder. They slept a little and woke before dawn because old places wake their people whether there is cause or not. They went down to the bend with bread and rope. Marlene came, silent and gray, with 2 men who had followed him all their lives and did not know how to stop. Tomas came, shame already working its penance by making him early. They cleared the west weir before the leaves clogged it. They marked the flood path with stakes and taught the stable boys where to run. They moved grain to the loft. They taught the children how to hold lanterns so they did not blow hot on the hand. Alara came with a list, and Maera crossed things off as if crossing off could make winter less winter. When rain did come, it came honestly. The meadow took what it would take, and no more, because ditches dug with understanding tell water the shapes a neighbor can live with. The river sulked at the bend and then went on about its business. The people of Greyhaven told the story of the night the bride vanished, and the telling grew, as all tellings do, antlers and ribbons it had never worn. Some said she had walked on water back to the hall. Some said the groom had gone under and come up with her on his shoulders like a fish too bright to let go. Old Myra did not correct them because she had learned there is no profit in fighting a story once it has decided what it wants to wear. But when the children asked her what the truth was, she said, "They kept their promise. That's all. That's everything." In the blue hour between night and morning, Ilara sometimes woke and listened. Rowan's breath next to her had a way of telling the rest of the house to wait. The river made its hymn beyond the orchard. She would reach in the dark and touch Rowan's wrist with 2 fingers, a small call and answer that never tired. "Listen," she would say, and even asleep he would make a sound that meant yes. They did not see Marlene often, which was as it should be. New customs do not like to be crowded by the ones they have replaced. But when he came to the bend in spring, with a coil of rope and a look that admitted his hands had not remembered their work quickly enough, Rowan handed him the other end without remark. Once Marlene lost his footing and went knee-deep and came up spluttering, and Rowan's hand caught his elbow. Marlene laughed, shocked at himself. Later, in the kitchen, he ate stew with an unhandsome appetite, and nobody looked at him as if he had been a monster in a crypt, because it turns out that eating the same stew shortens distances faster than words. Years later, when a boy with eyes too quick for his age asked Ilara if it was true that she had vanished and that the river had tried to marry her, she smiled, smoothed his hair, and said, "The river doesn't marry, it runs. People marry. And when they do it right, they don't make other people pay for it." He chewed that the way boys chew what they cannot bite yet, and nodded as if to say he would come back to the taste later. And when the story was told by lantern at winter, winding and embroidered and too loud in places and whispered in others, it always came to this, in the mouths that had heard the 2 who knew, that on the night she vanished, love did not ask the dark for permission. It listened, and it went, and it found, and afterward the world, having been shown a better way, made a little room for it. If you like this story, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps this channel grow. Thanks for watching.